You think the next bike you buy should be bigger than the last one. That's not an opinion. That's what 40 years of motorcycle culture programmed into you. Bigger engine, more power, more machine. That's how you prove you've arrived. Right now, the most experienced riders in America are proving that wrong, and they're not coming back. If you don't understand why, and most riders don't, the next bike you buy might be the one you regret. In this video, you're going to understand exactly what's driving this shift, what it means for every bike you'll ever buy, and why the answer might be closer to home than you think. I spoke to a rider who sold a $28,000 Tourer 18 months after buying it. Bike he'd saved for, planned for, finally bought. He thought the problem was the bike, too much for where he was in life right now, wrong season, wrong timing. The real problem was he'd confused a bigger bike with a better riding life. Those aren't the same thing. And it turns out, the most experienced riders in the US market are arriving at exactly that conclusion, in numbers large enough that the Motorcycle Industry Council can't ignore it anymore. Here's exactly what their 2025 data shows and what you need to do with it. The overall U.S. motorcycle market was down 7.6% in 2025. That is the number the manufacturers reached for first, rough year, economic headwinds, post-pandemic correction, the usual. And that framing is technically accurate. It is also exactly what they want you to focus on, because the moment you look past it, the story gets uncomfortable for them. Because within that declining market, something very specific was growing. Sport bikes were up 13%. Adventure bikes under 600 cubic centimeters were up 10% year over year. And zoom out from 1 year, and the adventure category as a whole is up 52% since 2019. And here's the number that should stop you cold. All of that sport bike growth came from machines under 750 cubic centimeters. Not the flagships, not the leader bikes that get the magazine covers and the YouTube dyno videos, the smaller ones. The ones the industry has spent decades positioning as starter bikes, as the thing you ride until you are ready for the real thing. They are growing, while the real things collapse. Touring bikes down 13%, cruisers down 6%. These are not rounding errors in a bad year. These are the category-level machines that built the identity of American motorcycling, the bikes that sit at the top of the aspirational ladder the industry spent 40 years constructing. And they are in sustained structural decline. The MIC's own director of research said it plainly, and I want you to hear this directly. Customers are moving towards smaller, affordable, versatile, and performance-focused models, while sales in traditional large displacement on highway segments like touring and cruisers continue to decline. That is not a critic. That is not an outside analyst with an agenda. That is the trade body that exists to represent the manufacturers, describing what is happening to the manufacturer's most expensive, most profitable products. Now here's what you need to understand. This did not start in 2025, and that changes everything about how seriously you should take it. Since 2019, off-highway capable motorcycles have collectively gained 8 points of U.S. market share. Sport bikes have gained 7 points. And traditional on-highway machines, the Tourers, the big cruisers, the bikes built for the highway, have lost a combined 15 market share points over that same period. 15 points. In 5 years. That is not a blip. That is not supply chain noise or a category going through a rough patch. That is a sustained directional year-over-year shift in what American riders are actually choosing with their own money. And yet, if you walked into most dealerships in 2023 or 2024, the floor was still telling the old story. Flagship Tourers up front, big cruisers under the lights, because that is where the margin lives. That is where 4 decades of cultural momentum pointed. And dealers are not stupid. They know what people come in expecting to want. But there is a gap opening up between what the showroom expects you to want and what experienced riders are actually buying. And that gap has been widening quietly for 6 years. The question you should be sitting with right now is, who exactly are those experienced riders? Because the answer is almost certainly not who you think it is. When you hear that small displacement bikes are the growth story in a down market, the brain goes to one place immediately: beginners, new riders, modest budgets, building up to something bigger. That's been the mental model for as long as anyone in this industry can remember. Small bikes are the entry point. You earn your way up the ladder. That's how it works. The reality is more interesting than that simple picture. The largest motorcycle buying demographic in the United States right now is riders between 45 and 64 years old. The median age of a United States motorcyclist is now approximately 50 years old, up from 32 in 1985. These are people with 20, 30, sometimes 40 years in the saddle. They have owned big bikes. They know exactly what a 1,200cc engine feels like beneath them at highway speed. They have the disposable income to buy anything on the floor without financing it. And a significant and growing number of them are choosing smaller. Let that land for a second, because that sentence puts serious pressure on the premise the industry is built on. The aspirational ladder only works if the people at the top of it keep wanting to climb. The business model of selling a 300, then a 650, then a 1,000, then a tourer depends on the experienced rider with money always wanting the next tier up, always reaching for more displacement, more weight, more machine. The 50-year-old with 30 years in the saddle is supposed to be the guy walking out with a $30,000 flagship tourer. Instead, he's increasingly the guy test riding a 650 adventure bike, asking how soon it can be ready, and putting a deposit down before he leaves the lot. And here's what nobody is talking about yet. The price of big bikes is making that decision a lot easier to justify. Which brings us to the part of the story that should genuinely concern you. Here's where it gets interesting, because what's happened to motorcycle prices since 2020 isn't just a market inconvenience. It's accelerating a shift that was already happening, and it's doing it in a way that the manufacturers have no obvious answer to. The average motorcycle price has surged over 40% since 2020. 40%. A flagship touring bike that was already a serious financial commitment at $22,000 in 2019 is now starting at $26,000 to $28,000, and that's before dealer freight, setup fees, extended warranties, and the accessories you need to actually tour on it. You are easily looking at $32,000 or more all in for a machine that will spend a meaningful portion of its life in your garage, because life is busy and big bikes raise the psychological bar for just going for a ride. Now put yourself in the seat of an experienced rider doing that math. On one side, $28,000 plus, roughly 850 pounds, ready to ride. A bike that demands a plan every time you want to ride it. On the other side, a 650 adventure bike at $7,000 that fits in your garage without rearranging everything, that you can drop on a gravel road without calling for help, that returns 50 to 70 miles to the gallon depending on how you ride it, that you can genuinely throw in the back of a truck for a weekend away. And the experienced rider looks at the $21,000 gap between those two options and asks himself one honest question: what exactly does that gap buy me that I actually use? More and more, he can't find an answer that survives contact with reality. And the brands that figured this out before everyone else, they're the ones quietly winning right now. And the ones that didn't, they're in serious trouble. And why that matters for your next purchase is something we need to talk about. If this is hitting different than you expected, hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps more riders find this. And drop in the comments what you're currently riding and whether a smaller bike has ever crossed your mind. I read those. The manufacturers who are winning right now are the ones who stopped waiting for the old model to come back and started building for the rider who actually exists in 2025. Honda has been running the CB series, the CB500F, the CB500X, at a price and spec level that looks like an entry product on paper, but moves heavily among experienced riders who are done paying for complexity they don't need. Insurance data and Honda's own sales charts show the CB500X's core demographic is the 51 to 60 age group, not beginners. Experienced riders choosing it deliberately. Royal Enfield made the 650 Twins the cornerstone of their U.S. strategy. Bikes that look classic, feel immediate, and give a rider with real experience something to actually enjoy instead of manage. Kawasaki's Z650 RS became a genuine phenomenon in the retro segment, not because of its dyno numbers, but because of what it deliberately didn't have. No intimidating electronic stack, no financial anxiety, no 850-pound curb weight requiring a plan every time you want to swing a leg over it. These aren't beginner bikes being bought by mistake. They are deliberate choices by riders who know exactly what they're walking away from. Now look at the other side of that equation. The brands that kept believing the upgrade path was still intact, that the experienced rider would always want the next tier up, that touring would stabilize, that the decline was cyclical. Those brands are now staring at 15 points of lost market share and a customer base that has quietly, without drama, already made their decision. The MIC data doesn't leave room for optimism here. 15 market share points don't come back in a product cycle, and the brands still leading with $28,000 plus flagships as their identity are fighting a structural headwind with a product philosophy the most experienced riders in the market have already moved past. Which brings us to the most important question in this whole video. What are those riders actually saying when you ask them why? When you talk to the riders who have already made this switch, not the ones considering it, the ones who did it 2 years ago and have lived with it every day since, 3 things come up almost every single time. The first is energy, not engine output, human energy, the physical and mental energy it takes to ride an 850-pound machine, to maneuver it in a gas station forecourt, to catch it when it starts to tip at a standstill, to manage its weight every single time you're moving at low speed in a parking lot or a tight turn. Big bikes extract a tax from your body that you genuinely do not feel at 35, and you absolutely feel at 52. And most riders won't say that out loud because it feels like admitting something. But it's real. It accumulates, and it changes the calculation. The second thing is how often they actually ride, and this one surprises people. Riders who downsized almost universally report riding more frequently after the switch. Not less. More. Because the smaller bike removes the psychological barrier that big bikes quietly create. You're not mounting an expedition every time you want to go out. You're just going for a ride. You grab the keys, you go. You're back in an hour, and it was exactly what you needed. The spontaneity that most people fell in love with motorcycling for in the first place comes back. The third thing is the hardest one for experienced riders to say out loud, because it cuts against a lifetime of assumption. But once they say it with real conviction. The smaller bike is just more fun on the roads they actually ride, not on a theoretical 800-mile touring day. On the actual roads outside their house, in the real time they have available. The twisty back roads, the B roads, the routes where you're never above 60 miles per hour and the engine is always working and you're completely in it. A 400 cubic centimeter or 650 cubic centimeter bike on those roads is alive in a way. A 1,200 cubic centimeter tourer is not even trying to be. You're riding the whole machine. You're not managing it from a distance. That's not a compromise. That's the point. None of this means big bikes disappear. Touring machines will always exist. There will always be riders who genuinely need them for what they do. The real long-haul trips, the 2-up miles, the highway distances that demand that kind of platform. But something has shifted in the conversation, and you need to understand what it is before your next purchase. The assumption that an experienced rider on a smaller bike is either a beginner or someone who's settled, and that assumption is dead. The data killed it. The 50-year-old with 30 years of riding behind him killed it. He didn't downgrade. He got honest about what he actually wants from a motorcycle, And the answer turned out to be less weight, less financial commitment, and a lot more of actually riding. If that sounds familiar, if you've had a version of that thought and quietly dismissed it because it felt like going backwards, you're not going backwards. You're catching up to where a growing number of the most experienced riders in the country already are. Here's what this whole market shift is actually telling you. Engine displacement was never a measure of how serious you were about riding. It was a measure of what the culture told you to want. And for 40 years, you believed it, because everyone around you believed it too. Most riders will walk into a showroom this year and feel the gravitational pull of the biggest bike on the floor. That pull is real. It's been engineered over decades, and it will cost a lot of people a lot of money for a machine that raises the barrier to riding instead of lowering it. You now know what the most experienced riders in America figured out the hard way. The best bike isn't the one that proves something. It's the one that makes you want to ride every single day. That one shift in thinking will change every bike decision you make for the rest of your life. If you want more videos that cut through the noise and give you what actually matters, subscribe. New video every week.